Welcome, everyone, to the Out on a Limb podcast. Welcome or welcome back. Today, we have another special episode with David Manning, one of my favorite energy workers, and I'm so excited he agreed to come chat with us today, all the way from the UK, where it's a little later in the day than it is here in Charleston. So let me give a brief introduction to David, and we're going to let him take it away. But David is a transmitter and receiver of energy and information. He interprets patterns in the fields of multidimensional energies and gives voice to them in order to make them accessible for others. He does this through online teleconferences, which are fabulous, also workshops and courses, and of course, through individual sessions. Welcome, David.
Welcome. No, thank you very much for inviting me. It's so nice to meet you all and to be with you. Thank you.
We're thrilled. I do have a little bit of experience with his teleconferences. Like I was telling him before we started live here, they're just so relaxing. The minute I get into his energy and his voice and his demeanor, it's just amazing.
It's soothing. My one, and forgive me, but my one and only experience with David, we were actually up on we have a pretty big lake, sizable lake, just north of us, and we were on our boat last summer. And Allison likes to just relax while I'm fishing. And well, she started playing that, and it was on, speakerphone or whatever, and loud. And I had to put my fishing pole down because I was like, okay, I'm going to fall asleep, or I'm going to go into meditation, or I'm going to go into some sort of trance, because this is just, vibratory. It was so intense.
I thought you were going to tell the one about, was it 2019 when we had the big eclipse?
Yes, that too. Yeah.
So we were out on the lake, the big eclipse.
Now I remember that.
That went straight over South Carolina.
Yeah.
And we're out there, and it was a yucky day, and we were trying to outrun the clouds. And that was another one that you had.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was fabulous.
Okay, Now you still haven't really had much of a chance to say anything, but I got a question already. If everyone's saying about how relaxing and soothing your voice is, and you're working with energy, so is it that you are modulating everybody's energy into the same frequency so that it's like exponentially greater, or just curious?
That's an interesting question. I've never actually thought about that, but there were a few things that happened around my voice where there were other layers of frequency added to the voice. So I became aware that there was a lot of energy transmitted on my voice, and that wasn't anything that I, at a personality level did. It was just things that I was made aware of, that there had been trainings in other times. So trainings with sound, trainings with what one teacher I had she called it the sacred voice, and that always seemed like a slightly pretentious title to me. But it's a voice that transmits quite a lot of energy, and that was sort of nothing to do with me, in effect, So when I'm offering a teleconference, we collectively, there may be between 100 and 200 people on the teleconferences from all over the world. And we build a field of energy with lots of invitations to lots of different groupings, lots of different beings, the earth, of course, the nature spirits, the crystals, the lion-headed beings are a field of beings. They work with me, so they're always very present. Everybody's guides and higher selves, a lot. And so the field builds and builds and builds. And that enables a lot of energy work to happen, both for those that are in attendance or listening to the recording, but also for the wider collective, because the energy work is always dedicated to the upliftment of the whole of humanity, in effect. So it seems some powerful energy work is happening. And again, I'm not responsible for that. The field does the work. I am a placeholder for the field in that sense, Does that make sense? So I'm not consciously modulating everybody's energy, but I think it happens because that's what happens. If you're a room full of people meditating together, your field modulates, and we connect heart to heart and build a field. And, thousands of years ago, we would have meditated in temples together to modulate the energy of the planet, I think. And now we get to do it in with modern technology, we get to do it from all over the world. We don't have to be in the same location, and that really works on the planetary field. I think that's one of the blessings of these technologies that we're working with now. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
It's all started.
Well, we definitely want to get to how all that started, but that reminds me then, because you offer these via Zoom throughout the world,
Yeah.
when did you start offering those teleconferences, and did they change during COVID when everybody kind of went to Zoom?
Luckily for me, I had been, my work had moved online. So I had been doing a lot of work, well, not a lot of work, because I didn't really have this as a business. It was something I did, but I didn't ever think it would be what supported me. And there was guidance came in on the December solstice of 2013, which said, we want you to finish the work you're doing. I was working as a garden designer in London, and we want you to focus on workshops and energy work and building a website and all of that sort of thing. And I thought, oh, great, marvelous. And I was on a plane at the time, heading off on a Christmas holiday, and I thought about this all over Christmas. Came back to London after Christmas and froze and didn't know what to do. I was terrified of doing anything, so I did nothing for 2 years. And then somebody who had quite an audience really liked the work I do, and she said, "I'm going to launch you. How are we going to do this?" I'd done some energy work with her that she really responded well to, and she said, "I'll launch you." And I knew I could work with groups of people, and I knew it would happen online. And I was in Edinburgh at the time, and there was a lot of history of witchcraft and persecution of the witches in Edinburgh, and that was very present in the landscape, and so I was very aware of that. And I had done a lot of work around that in the past when I had started giving readings at a place called the College of Psychic Studies in London. One woman after another would walk into the room, and in their field would be that pattern of the Inquisition, and the burning of the witches. And I understood over time that was a really significant piece of energy work by the church to suppress not only women, but to terrify a vast population out of opening up their multidimensionality. And it was a really, really successful piece of energy work. It closed down, millions of people for a long period of time, because that became a deep psychic wound then in the collective that was still holding hundreds of years later. And it would come up when I was doing readings, and then I realized that I had that pattern in my field. I later realized that I had been one of the architects of that pattern, that I had been in the church, creating that. And so it was part of my role to help to unwind that pattern. And so the first teleconference I did was on the burning of the witches and releasing that painful pattern that would act, as somebody would start to open up their psychic abilities, they would meet this pattern in their field, and it would terrify them. There would be that subconscious, I can't do this. I can't go through this pattern. And so releasing that was a really significant piece of work that we did. And from that, from the first teleconference, 150 people signed up for that. And that number has sort of stayed the same right the way through. And that was, the first one was in 2015. So it's 8 years now, May of 2015. So it is 8 years. So, and the number has, regardless of, I have obviously developed a website and had a newsletter list, but the numbers haven't really changed. So I have a sense that number is a useful number to work, to build a field that is planetary wide. It's a planetary field, people from all over the world. And I think that field holds a significant amount of energy that can work collectively. So
fantastic. And it's so interesting because not only do I enjoy the teleconferences, but you write quite a bit of your meditative process and what comes through for you prior to and what prompts you to that next teleconference. And you'll often say that you're in your garden or whatever when these things come to you, and how you process that and then how you're going to utilize that for the greater collective. So it's fantastic, even just reading your posts.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's a lot of energy gets transmitted through that, and that's not something that I focus on. It just happens. But it's that a lot of people tell me afterward, well, just reading your newsletter was a profound healing for me, or something like that, so but not something that I focus on. It's just about, and often that, I'll be aware there's something wants to be written, and I'll be resistant, and I think, I can't be bothered, I don't want to do that today, and then I criticize myself, I should be more available. And then I try and sit down and write something, and it doesn't happen. And then all of a sudden I sit down to write, and it gets written in 20 minutes, and it's done, and there's something, so it takes a few days for the energy to formulate itself. And I usually have a couple of experiences, maybe a dream or something will happen when I'm doing a one-to-one with a client, and a pattern will emerge. And I can see when I'm working in somebody's personal field, or when we're working in a place where the personal field meets the collective field. And then if it's in that place, I know that we're working, on what is a personal pattern for that individual, but it's also a collective pattern, and that we're starting to work into the collective field as well. And then often a teleconference will emerge from that piece of energy work.
Mm-hmm.
Did you listen to it was like a 6-minute video that you just posted, all about how and I'm trying to remember the word, it's not integrating, but it's how, okay, so, he's saying that, that he couldn't quite write this out. So you're talking it through, right? But I thought it was really cool that you were talking it through and posting it at the same time. But it was about that. About how humans are moving back into that heart field or heart, like.
That's right. I always, when I'm doing something, I'm right in it, and then afterwards I have no recollection of it at all, because I am in an altered state, and it just, so I have to go back and look at it to think, what was I doing? So I couldn't remember what I had said in that. I did get a bit of criticism for that, because I had been on the beach wearing sunglasses, and I had big white panda eyes and brown cheeks and a brown nose, and friends pointed that out with a lot of delight. So I hadn't paid attention to
sharing that thought process. Like usually, what we see is somebody does the work, behind the scenes, polishes it up nice, and then presents it, and instead you are giving us like, well, this is how I, kind of struggle with it, let it sit with me, and voice it out, and then it becomes a thing. And so I can't wait to see what you're going to do with that piece, because now I've seen a little bit of it.
Well, we did a teleconference on it on Sunday, so it got woven in on Sunday. And there were a few other pieces that get woven into that. Again, I can't, for the life of me, I can't quite remember what, because that was a whole 4 days ago now, and it's gone. You know what it's like at the moment? It's like one day, and I can't remember what happened yesterday, because this is where we're at now, and it's difficult to keep track. What I do know is when I look back over what has been done on the teleconferences, it's like, oh, wow, I really see a beautiful pattern that's emerging. And again, I can't claim any responsibility for that. I'm literally downloading or uploading, or I'm in the midst of these fields and interpret the energies. But I do see a beautiful pattern that emerges about how we have been worked through many, many layers of big archetypal patterns of wounding, like the witchcraft piece, or like the enslavement genetics piece, or there was one that was on the rape construct, and I was seeing this energy emerging from the core of the earth, and it was about, and this was a few years ago now, but it was about the rape of the feminine, and how that was based in patriarchal constructs, and that it operated at, at a planetary level, and what we were doing to the planet, as well as, to women, and individual women in particular. And it was an act of suppression that emerged out of again, teachings of the church in terms of, a man shall have dominion over the earth, giving human beings the right to take what they want, in effect. And then, of course, the suppression of the feminine that has happened on the planet over many thousands of years. And so I could see this emerging from in the core of the earth. And we did a teleconference on it. And then within a couple of weeks, the Me Too movement sort of unfolded. And I'm not in any way claiming responsibility for that, but it was part of a wave of energy that was moving, and I was just seeing that just a little bit ahead of time, and part of that process. So yeah, I think it's a lovely collective process, and I think a lot of people work in, but we're all very individual and unique, and nobody works in quite the way I do, but I think a lot of people work in similar sorts of ways,
What I like is the fact that, for myself, I'm a trance channel, so I understand your aspect of, having a transmission come through and putting all the pieces together and have that transmission come through. And then somebody asks you about it a day or so later and you're like, I have no idea. Right. But the framework in which you just laid out, I think is quite interesting. And I think it really helps many of us that work in this field of, we're so impatient about when we get that little bit of a nudge or that little bit of a, maybe we get that transmission started. We're so impatient to actually see what that is. But what you've done over time is learned how to just let it sit. And then you begin to see the patterns of the full picture. And then you have a clear transmission that does come through. And I think that's a really key aspect for many that are working in this field, that feel they get transmissions, but they want to know what the message is right at the moment. Just let it cook, let it sit, enjoy the day. Don't force yourself into what isn't there at the moment. So, I thank you for, laying that out in the way you did. So.
No, and I think always this work, it develops me. The work has developed me, and it's pushed me to trust and to surrender and, own up to all of the little bits and pieces that, where I want to claim credit for something, where I want attention. All the time this gets worked on and worked on and worked on. And I'm aware the work is very much for the collective as well, but it's very much work for me. So it truly is, and I often pinch myself, it's an amazing honor to be able to do my work at the same time as work, for the collective. And I think a lot of us are in that lovely place now where that merges. But it's a lovely gift to be able to participate in this work, because I do feel that I'm a participant in it, and I'm very aware of being the body on the ground that receives a lot of support and guidance, and help, to be able to do this. And there were many times in my life, and I know you perhaps want to touch into some of those times, where I was very, very resistant to doing this work. And I spent many years in major patterns of self-destruction as a way of attempting to avoid showing up for this, because I didn't realize it at the time, but I was terrified of this work. And that might also have been some of that, which the suppression of the witches, that sort of thing. It might have been some of that pattern feeding into my own inner terrors, but I didn't want to do this work. Part of me did. I did at some level, and at other levels. So there was enormous conflict in me about stepping into this, and it took a long, long time for me to really be in a place where it could happen. There was a lot of patching up that had to be done because I'd made a bit of a mess of things.
For sure, and all of us, really. And it is a privilege. Will and I, and Samantha as well, I'm sure, feel very humbled and fortunate to be able to do this sort of work and be boots on the ground with our guidance teams and act as a conduit. And I'm
sure.
glad you mentioned trust and surrender. I do want to get into that as your story unfolds, because that's an important thing for all of us as we continue to evolve. And it's almost a day-to-day process.
Yeah.
You have written on your site, you said that this deep connection with multidimensional fields arrived when I was 27, but for many years I was primarily identified with my wounds. So I want to start with the wounding and share only as much as you feel comfortable with, but what were some of your experiences in childhood and young adulthood that made you feel so wounded? What were some of the things that were going on back then?
I grew up in a my parents were addicts. They were both alcoholics. There was a lot of violence between them in the house. And so that life felt very unsafe, very much a battleground. And some of my earliest memories are watching my mother really being quite badly beaten by my father and thinking she's going to die. And, you know, the terror of that as a very young child, watching that. And so I also automatically sided with her, wanted to protect her, but I was a little child. I couldn't. So felt totally inadequate because of that. Later, not that much later, but there was an experience where I came to really understand that, oh, she was as much an architect of her victimhood as, you know, that they were locked in the victim persecutor dance, and and they needed each other for that dance to play itself out. And so that shattered. So I remember that being a really shocking revelation to me, that she you know, she's as locked into this as he is. It isn't that he's the villain and she's the victim. It's a dark and nasty dance that is where they're both as complicit as each other. And that was very eye-opening for me as a 10-year-old. But it left me, you know, that was one of the the fundamental planks I had built my life on, was that my mother was the victim and he was the villain. And it was that was no longer there, and that left me very insecure. I would also had been very aware that I was gay from a very early age. And in the town where I grew up, in a small little town in Wales, on the coast in Wales, and I was born in 1963. So growing up in the 60s and 70s, that wasn't something you could, you know, it was a different age, a very different time. And my thinking, my belief system then was that if that had become public knowledge, that my only option would have been to commit suicide. So I was putting myself under a lot of pressure to keep that buried. So I was living a lie at that level. Then there was a big pattern of sexual abuse, not from immediate family, but from a extended family member, which left me shattered, really. And then I became an addict myself. I was already using addictive substances by the age of 7. So I was sniffing solvents and getting very high. And so it was a very messy cocktail. And I constructed, because I left my body when I was raped as a very young child. The trauma was such that it sent me out of my body, and I stayed out for a long, long time, many years. You know, it was a long time before that aspect came in. And so I felt like an empty shell, and I constructed a personality that would get me through life, but there wasn't much going on behind that personality. And so I used, you know, from an early age then, alcohol and, alcohol primarily as a teenager to get through that. And then as soon as I got to London at 19, I was on whatever drugs, you know, I could find. I mean, I was just partying the whole time. So it was a mess. And very surprised that I survived, to be honest. And I almost didn't, I almost didn't. So, but there had always also been this strong multidimensional current running through. So as a child, there was a voice in the center of my head that chatted away all the time, and kept me company, in a sense. It makes me want to cry now just speaking about it. And that left when I was 7, and I felt abandoned and devastated. But it had to leave so that I would focus more in the world. That didn't really work, I don't think. And often I would have strange experiences that I knew I couldn't really talk to other people about. But one of them I came to realize afterwards was that I would often close my eyes, and internally I would be seeing out of somebody else's eyes. And I know now that those were what we could term parallel lives, or other aspects of my soul present on the planet. Now, one of those was a girl in China, I think, and one of them was a man, I think, in America. And I those things were happening, but so that was a strong aspect of my inner world too. But it was complete chaos, to be honest, and huge confusion, and I learnt to create a facade that told the world, I'm fine. Don't you dare ask me if anything's going on for me, because that facade wasn't that strong, and I was very heavily defended. It was like, keep everybody away. And then at the age of 27, I remember coming home from work, and I was in London, and I was rolling a joint in the kitchen, and this voice popped up again, and it was like, and it just started telling me things and leading me through things, and that was lovely, and it awoke a whole field of abilities. It led me to this place, the College of Psychic Studies in London, and I trained there, and I worked there for over a long period of time. But I was also dropping deeper into my addiction at the same time that all of this was opening up, and I was trying very hard to do both, to keep both. And of course, you can't. I knew that I wouldn't be able to do both, that I would have to let go of alcohol and drugs, but I really didn't want to, because I was actually terrified of what this world was offering. And early on in my exploration of psychic development, I knew that I was touching truths and fields of energy that were so beautiful and so real, and I knew that they wanted all of me, and I knew that I wasn't in any way ready to give all of me to that. And the result was that I sort of tore myself in two with that, to the point that I almost died with my addictions, and then had to stop. And a year after stopping alcohol and drugs, I had liver cancer, which was, medically speaking, I was told, now this is, you're not going to survive this. There's nothing more we can do. The chemotherapy is not working. And that was the real wake-up call for me at that stage, because I still had this lovely connection, although I had tried very hard to destroy it, but it wouldn't be destroyed. So the cancer was, I mean, it was a beauty. There is a teleconference on my website where I talk about the whole of the cancer process, because it was an astoundingly beautiful process from before before I actually became ill through till afterwards. It was as if I was held in a beautiful, beautiful bubble of light and walked through the whole process. And as soon as I asked for this time, when 2 different teams of doctors had said to me, okay, you're going to die within months, I went into guidance and asked, went in and was told, well, look, it's your life, you can do what you want with it. you've been living as if you wanted to die, and you're about to get that result. Is that what you want? And if it is, then that's fine. Come home. Not a problem. But if it isn't, then make your mind up. And then I was told that the only reason for living is to live with joy. And if you can't do that, you might as well come back. But if you want to live with joy, then make that your focus. And living with joy had never, ever seemed like a possibility to me. It had never occurred to me that that could be an option, you know. And so I decided, and this was in London on Hampstead Heath. It was February morning. It was cold and it was windy. And I said, yes, okay, I'll live. Will you help me? And this one little white feather just spiraled down and landed at my feet. And it shouldn't have spiraled down because there was a 20-mile-an-hour wind blowing and it should have been carried on the wind. But it just spiraled down and landed at my feet. And I knew that was my answer. And so the cancer was gone a month later. And the doctors said, oh, well, you know, the chemotherapy must have kicked in then. And I knew that if I had said, no, I'll come home, I would have probably been dead a month later. There would have been, you know, something would have happened and I would have died. And that would have been okay too. It was made very clear to me that it didn't matter what choice I made. In fact, I was told, you'll be doing the same work anyway, whether you're in or out of a body, so it doesn't really matter. And it was like, oh, okay. And there was something, I think reverse psychology was used on me because it took the pressure off. I was this, you know, I should be living this, something I should do, you know, all of this sort of thing. And it was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. And it was like, oh, so it changed things. That process changed things for me a lot. But afterwards, I thought everything would open up beautifully. And of course it didn't, because I had years and years of very deep shadow work to do in order to repair the mess I had made of things. And then a lot of the childhood stuff that I hadn't begun to touch, you know, so it was profound. And there were times in the, you know, where I thought, oh, I wish I had said I would die rather than I would live, because it was really hard graft for a long time. And then slowly things came back together, and I built a life, because I hadn't made much of my life up until then. I had always been avoiding life, and slowly built a life. And then this opened up in 2015, again orchestrated not from my efforts, but from, I guess, the impatience of my team saying, oh my God, we've got to find a way to get him doing what he said he would come and do.
Not orchestrated by you, or not, you know, that was really profound that you made the choice to live. Like, that takes
guts.
Yeah, that takes, especially because you got to go through it now. Like, you can't, there are decisions you make in your life, and you know that if you're making the decision to move forward, then you have to work through, you know, the detritus, the mess that you've made of your life. Like, you have to deal with that.
But I didn't know that at the time.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was thinking, oh, I'll probably be able to write a book now about how to heal yourself with cancer, and I'll just move straight onto the lecture circuit, and that will be it. And it wasn't that at all. It was just years and years of really deep shadow work. All of the sexual abuse stuff, which I had been suppressing, you know, I had kept a lid on it. And it's weird, that capacity we have, because we have it, it's a collective capacity as well as an individual capacity to keep memories just below the surface. So I knew something had happened. And when the funny thing was, and this is such a lovely story, I don't know how to quite go into it. So before the sexual abuse memories came back, about a year before, this unicorn had started showing up in my meditations. So there was this huge, shiny, silvery white unicorn up here in meditations. And And I had often seen animals in meditations, but this wasn't communicating anything. It was just there as a presence. And it annoyed me because I was thinking, well, if I wanted a power animal, I would like a bear or a lion or a wolf, not a bloody unicorn. And this was before unicorns were fashionable even.
Right.
So, and it was just up here. And then I was on a yoga retreat and these memories just exploded. I had a dream about my uncle, and I was late for the yoga class, and I rushed in, and we were talking about dreams that morning by chance, and I started to talk about it, and it was like an internal explosion where everything just exploded all at once, and I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed for a long time. And then I was sitting in the garden afterwards on the break, just sort of trying to pull myself together a bit and just come back to myself. And this unicorn appeared, and on his back was the 3-year-old me, and the unicorn trotted into my heart and brought the 3-year-old me back. And that was, I had left my body as a 3-year-old and had been taken care of in other dimensions. And that single piece of integration work, again, which I didn't orchestrate, or it was a magical moment, healed a wound of emptiness that I had been trying to fill for years and years and years with all sorts of things, drugs, sex, food, everything, and had never quite been able to. And that was a really significant shift point. And so when we hear about the horrible stories about sexual abuse that happened and ritual abuse, and I know that I have touched a tiny piece of that, because what happened to me was nothing compared. But I understand the how easy it is to shatter a child's energy field and to for them to be disembodied and to dissociate and go out of body, and what a profound wound that is, and how how often that would result in suicide by one means or other, perhaps not a direct suicide, but an addictive suicide or an accident, or just giving up on life. Because if you're not present enough to hold the currents of life in your form, then it will become destructive, and so it's an extraordinary thing that happens, in the sexual use of children on this planet.
So what would you say to someone? I've got someone close to me who just started dissociation at about, probably 4 years old. And you know what that does to a child's mind, before the time they're 6. And, what would you say is and amazingly, she has overcome obstacles that it just blows my mind. But what would you say is the key thing for someone to do, to look for, to seek, to try to overcome that dissociation? Like, she learned to stay in her body, how to be present. But what was the singular thing for you that helped you to stop? I mean, because I can look at her and there's, the deer in headlights kind of thing. And the person's just not there. So what was the singular thing that really helped you with that? Or is it more of a spiritual experience?
For me, it was very much a spiritual, but everything for me has been spiritual, really. And, I was always guided. I mean, I worked with lots and lots of different therapists, lots of different healers, lots of different modalities and yoga and many, many different approaches. And I think when I had made this field safe enough, then that part of me could come back.
Okay.
So I had to do years of work to make, to feel safe. And that safety, because I hadn't felt safe at all in any of my childhood. So I had to ground myself, feel safe, and do the really hard graft. and it is hard graft when there's a big chunk of you missing. It's really hard graft. And then, to create a field of safety, which then allowed that piece. And the safety here calls that other aspect back in. And so you can go and do integration work or soul retrieval work, or, with shamans and whatever. But the work will only happen at the rate that is appropriate for you. And I think there's a lot of other work that has to happen.
That makes
so you have to really want it. And for me, the work is, the multidimensional aspect of things has always been a primary mover in my case. That was always a part of my experience and has led the way, in a sense, even to that sense of, because when that 3-year-old aspect came back in, a lot of the memories came back, which was really unpleasant. And one of those memories was being led into a room by my uncle to meet some of his friends who were into the same sort of thing that he was, and to be introduced to them. Now, I didn't see them because behind them was a large unicorn. And that's when, so I went out of my body to the unicorn, and I didn't experience what happened. And so imagine the saving grace of that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That, if I had stayed in my body to experience that, I probably wouldn't have survived. So it's a way of maintaining some degree of integrity of the field, in a way that knows and trusts that all things can be remedied, all things can be healed, all things can be made whole again. And, a time span of 40 years isn't that much, in the eyes of our soul. It's a lot for a life, but our soul doesn't view things through just the one life or that perspective. It's the whole. And there was the added bonus, in a sense, of being out of your body for extended periods of time keeps the channels open that otherwise would close down. And so there was that too.
Mm-hmm. And
so nothing is ever simple, and then nothing is ever cut and dried. There was another piece of awareness where I knew that me and my uncle had been married in a previous lifetime, and there was some, there were all sorts of weird things and it's that, you can't make head nor tail of it, and it, in a sense, it's best not to try. But and I don't in any way condone using children for sexual gratification. It's a shattering experience for the child, and adults need to take responsibility for those impulses if they're feeling them around children. But it's never as cut and dried as it seems. There are many, many dimensions at play, at work, and as I say, I don't in any way condone that behavior, but there are more layers to us than we are currently aware of, and I'm very fortunate that I got to glimpse some of those layers, because that helped tremendously in my healing process.
All I know from my perspective with that is that, so I knew the abuser, and after the fact, and I don't know what happened with my process, but I just reached a point where I was like, I need to forgive this person for me. And I actually wrote him a letter telling him, I don't condone the actions, which any other person would have taken a gun and shot the guy, but I was like, I don't condone the actions, but I forgive you for your role. And I understand that this couldn't have happened unless you had agreed to play this heinous role. And I never heard back from him. I'm sure he thought I'd lost my mind. I know that I put that to bed and it was done, and I see the benefits that have, it's weird to say that, the benefits, but when you move on, you begin to have the gratitude, you see the benefits, the strength. I have a relationship with this person that is amazing, that I wouldn't have had we not gone through kind of the fires of hell together. So there's, I get what you're saying, but you're saying it on a whole other level. But just from my experience in this lifetime, it's been amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it always is, the place of our deepest wound is the place where your greatest gifts will manifest, when you do the work, isn't it? And that's it. I mean, life has been crazy for me, but I know that a lot of the experiences I've had with addiction and deep illness, I was diagnosed HIV positive in 1992, and that was a factor in the cancer, a factor in my addiction. It was all a very tangled mess. And at that stage, there was no medication. So again, the doctors had said, well, you might be healthy now. I was 20, what would I be, 1992, 29 at that stage. And he said you could expect to be dead within 10 years. And I was sort of living my life accordingly, in a sense, and, but even with that, there were amazing, the multidimensionality already kicked in with that. And I was told, within minutes of being diagnosed, there's nothing to worry about with this. Don't worry, and so I never did. So it's it's all there's and all of those experiences, because you have to go into yourself to do the work of healing, and that's, so it's always been grist for the mill, as it were, and then it enables you to sit with somebody in their darkest experiences and transmit the understanding that whatever you have lived, whatever has been done to you, whatever you have done to others, you can move through it and past it if you want. And I know that, and so I can hold that energy for somebody, and that's really useful,
That is a powerful statement. Thank you for that. That's a big deal for those who are watching, who have gone through trauma, and our clients who have gone through trauma. And back to the surrendering and the trusting, you said that, for instance, through the cancer, they said, don't worry about it, and you didn't. Does your trust come from having that direct guidance, or is it a daily kind of practice to continue to trust and surrender? Do you often fall back or backslide sometimes?
Yeah, totally. I'm very human, and my baseline is addiction. So I can be addicted to avoidance and all sorts of things. And trust and surrender, they're not one-off events, are they? They do have to be practiced on a daily basis, and life will always show you where you're not surrendering and where I'm not trusting. And so it's easy for me to trust on the bigger things because I've had a lot of practice on those, but I still have issues, around lots of things. Choosing a builder to work in my home is an issue. It's a big issue of trust, those sorts of things. And in the end, I always get there and think, okay, it will be fine. I was wanting to have a dog when we were all in lockdown, and the dog breeder who I was going to go with said, oh no, you can't choose the puppy. Because it's lockdown, you can't come and choose a puppy, you can't come and look at them. And I was like, well, that's not going to work for me. If she's choosing the puppy, how am I going to know what puppy I'm going to get? And I went into meditation and said, I don't think this is going to work. And as soon as I dropped into meditation, my heart opened and a puppy was dropped into my heart. And I knew immediately that the perfect dog had already been chosen for me. Now, the dogs weren't even born at that stage, but I knew as that image dropped into my heart that he'd already been chosen. And when I picked him up, he is totally the perfect dog for me, and I couldn't have chosen a better dog. So I get huge support all the time. that's the lovely thing for me, because I've needed it. I've really needed a lot of support. I wouldn't be on the planet if it weren't for the support and the extraordinary patience that has been extended towards me when I haven't had the patience for myself, or the self-care, or any of those things. It has been extended to me from other dimensions. And slowly, more and more of me has thawed out, and I have relaxed into those other dimensions and made more of them, or integrated more of them into my daily awareness, in that sense. And I think that's how the process goes. We expand into bigger and bigger versions of ourselves as we open into these higher levels of the field. But first, you have to do a significant amount of the healing work in the lower levels of the field, the personality levels of the field, and clear up a lot of the knots there.
Well, we could talk to David Manning for a long time because there's so much to talk about. So we're going to go ahead and break here, and we're going to come back with part 2. So you'll definitely want to tune in again, because the conversation just keeps getting better. So thank y'all so much for being with us on Out on a Limb podcast. Until next time.
See you guys.